In 1995, a single mother was living on state welfare, raising a baby daughter alone, and had just finished writing a book that 12 different publishers had rejected. She had, by her own words, failed on an epic scale: no husband, no job, and barely enough money to survive. 2 years later, that same rejected manuscript would become the beginning of one of the best-selling book series in human history. She had wanted to be a writer since she was a small child, writing her very first story about a rabbit at just 6 years old. But writing didn't pay the bills, so after university she worked a series of ordinary office jobs, none of which she was particularly good at or interested in. In 1990, everything changed in an instant. She was on a delayed train from Manchester to London, staring out the window, when the idea for a young wizard arrived in her mind almost fully formed. She had no pen on her at the time, so she spent the 4-hour delay simply imagining the story, too excited to write any of it down. But life didn't slow down to let her write it. Her mother died after a long illness. Shortly after, she moved to Portugal to teach English, married, had a daughter, and then went through a difficult divorce. She returned to the UK with her infant daughter and almost nothing else. She moved to Edinburgh to be near her sister, and found herself living on state benefits, doing her best to raise a child completely alone. She later described herself as being as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without actually being homeless. To finally finish the manuscript she'd been carrying in her head for years, she wrote in local cafes. Not because it was glamorous, but because it was warm, and pushing her sleeping daughter's pram back and forth let her write for a few uninterrupted hours at a time. Much of the first book was written by hand at small tables, one chapter at a time, while her daughter slept quietly beside her. When the manuscript was finally finished, she sent it out to literary agencies and publishers. One rejection came in. Then another. Eventually, 12 different publishers turned the book down. Some said children's books, especially long ones about wizards, simply didn't sell. Others didn't respond at all. For a woman with almost nothing left to fall back on, each rejection letter felt like one more confirmation that this dream might not work out. Then a small publishing house finally agreed to look at the first few chapters. The deciding factor wasn't an executive or a market analyst. It was the editor's 8-year-old daughter, who read the opening chapter and immediately demanded to read the rest. The publisher offered a modest advance, and even then, an editor advised her to get a day job, since children's books rarely made anyone any money. She had already been living on so little that the advice barely registered. She took the deal anyway, still working part-time as a teacher to support her daughter while the book slowly made its way toward publication. The book was finally published in 1997 under a shortened version of her name, since publishers worried young boys wouldn't want to read a book written by a woman. It sold modestly at first until word of mouth began to spread among children, then parents, then entire schools. 6 more books followed over the next decade. The series was eventually translated into over 80 languages and became one of the best-selling book series ever written, selling more than 500 million copies worldwide. It was adapted into one of the highest-grossing film franchises in history. The woman who had once needed government assistance just to feed her daughter became the first person in history to become a billionaire from writing books alone. She later said that rock bottom became the solid foundation on which she rebuilt her life. Losing almost everything had stripped away everything inessential, leaving her with nothing left to do but pour herself completely into the one thing she actually loved. 12 rejections weren't proof that the story was bad. They were simply 12 people who couldn't see what one 8-year-old girl saw immediately. If this story inspired you, subscribe to the Setback Files. Every week, we uncover the real struggles behind the world's greatest success stories. What's something you almost gave up on? Tell us in the comments below.